Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into a set of claims around what's being called the Corona scandal.
That's right. We're looking at information said to come from Robert Koch Institute protocols, the RKI.
And we know you're here because you want to grasp complex info quickly, see different sides, and, well, not feel totally overwhelmed by it all.
Exactly. Our aim is really to unpack the main arguments, the key points being made in this material about how the pandemic was handled in Germany.
Okay, so let's get started. The material kicks things off pointing to, Wuhan, China, where the virus first emerged.
And it spread globally. It mentions these early predictions, something like 2 million deaths expected in that first year, according to the source.
A really core claim right at the beginning is about how deaths were counted. The assertion is that anyone dying with corona was labeled a corona death.
Regardless of the actual underlying cause.
That's the claim, which,
Huh.
if true, would obviously skew the numbers quite a bit.
It definitely would. It would impact how deadly the virus appeared and, well, the policies made in response.
Then the focus shifts to Germany's response. The argument presented here is that Germany basically just copied China's lockdown approach.
Without much independent scientific reasoning. Is that the idea?
Yes, that's what the source alleges. It even contrasts the sort of preferred theory of bats in a market with suggestions, like Trump's, of a lab origin.
Interesting contrast there.
And then, here's a big one. The claim is that the RKI protocols themselves actually state the virus was created in a Chinese lab.
Wow, okay. That's a very specific and pretty explosive claim. If the source really says the protocols state that, well, verification would be crucial.
Absolutely. So moving on to the RKI protocols more generally. As you probably know, the RKI is Germany's main federal public health institute. They provide recommendations based on science analysis.
Right, the official body. But the material says these protocols weren't initially public.
Correct. And the official line, according to this source, was basically nothing explosive in here, but then after requests, redacted versions came out.
And that caused a stir.
Apparently so. The source mentions anger and outrage, suspicion about what was blacked out. Redactions can do that.
They certainly can fuel speculation, what's hidden and why.
Precisely. Then the material talks about an alleged leak, an unredacted version supposedly released by a former RKI employee.
Ah, okay. And how did officials react to that, according to the source?
It mentions a tweet from the health minister trying to downplay it, saying the unredacted stuff wasn't really significant.
But the narrator of the source material didn't buy that.
No, there's a sarcastic comment mentioned about just how much was redacted, implying important things were hidden.
So this whole sequence builds a narrative, at least in this source, of a lack of transparency, potential concealment.
Exactly. Okay, so now we get into the effectiveness, or lack thereof, of the measures themselves. First up, masks.
Right. What's the claim there?
The claim is that some doctors thought masks were, well, pointless, that there wasn't good evidence they stopped viruses.
And these dissenting doctors faced consequences.
Allegedly, yes. The source claims they lost their jobs. And this is contrasted with supposed later additions in the RKI protocols that masks could even be harmful.
That's quite a claim. It touches on scientific debate, dissenting opinions, and whether the official stance shifted. Of course, the science on masks was evolving.
True. Then, lockdowns. The assertion comes up again. Heavily influenced by China. Not enough German-specific science behind them.
And the costs.
Briefly mentioned, yeah. The financial hit for businesses, individuals, and also the social division, people proud to wear masks versus those feeling oppressed by them.
Those economic and social impacts were huge and debated everywhere, really. The basis for those decisions is key.
Then, school closures.
Yeah.
The source claims these happened despite early knowledge that kids weren't high risk for severe illness.
Okay. What else?
Social distancing, obviously. And the Bußgelder, the fines. The source questions the legitimacy of these fines, especially in light of things supposedly revealed later in the protocols.
Right. Sort of suggesting the rules were based on flawed premises.
That seems to be the implication. It even mentions Austria allegedly having to repay about 150,000 euros in fines.
Interesting comparison. So, questioning the proportionality and evidence base.
And it gets a bit darker here. The material alleges public shaming was basically allowed or even encouraged against critics of the rules.
As a way to silence dissent.
To instill fear, discourage questions, that's the claim. Then it discusses the pandemic of the unvaccinated idea.
Ah, yes, that framing.
And the big push for vaccination Despite, and this is another key claim alleged knowledge inside the health ministry, as early as 2021, that the vaccines didn't actually stop transmission.
So the claim is they knew about breakthrough infections early on, but pushed the narrative differently.
That's what the source states. He gives examples, like people getting infected even after 2 doses.
This suggests a deliberate strategy to promote vaccination by distinguishing between groups, even if the scientific reality of transmission was more complex. That alleged early knowledge is a critical point.
Definitely. Now, let's zero in on the vaccines themselves and the side effects claims.
Okay, what does the material say?
It mentions vaccine approvals being slow in Switzerland, claiming manufacturers actually withdrew applications there. Then it asserts quite directly an increase in illness and death because of the COVID vaccines.
Specifically mentioning any.
Yeah, the BioNTech vaccine is highlighted, and then it lists some really concerning personal stories.
Anecdotes.
Yes, anecdotal accounts of things like heart muscle inflammation, needing artificial feeding, heart attacks, life support, people unable to function without oxygen or wheelchairs, all allegedly after getting vaccinated with various vaccines.
Those are very serious accounts. While anecdotal, they feed into the concerns about potential adverse events. You'd need to balance these with large-scale safety data, of course.
Of course. The material also alleges manufacturers shielded themselves from liability early on. AstraZeneca and brain vein thrombosis is given as an example.
Right, the liability waivers were part of the emergency rollouts in many places.
It also claims incorrect vaccine doses were sometimes given. And then a really alarming assertion that every second vaccination potentially triggers autoimmune attacks on organs, brain, heart, everything, described as unprecedented, experimental.
That's a massive claim. Medically, that would need extraordinary evidence, peer-reviewed research, to be substantiated.
Absolutely. The argument then becomes the risks of the vaccine outweigh the benefits because, the source claims, they don't stop you getting infected or spreading it.
So linking back to that transmission point.
Exactly. And it claims this lack of transmission prevention was known early on in the RKI protocols, contradicting media reports that supposedly said there were no side effects.
A direct contradiction alleged between internal knowledge and public messaging.
Yes. It brings up AstraZeneca, again, their later warning about thrombosis, losing EU approval, but claims German media blamed low demand, not safety concerns.
Interesting point about the framing of that news.
It also mentions Denmark and Norway suspending AstraZeneca, Germany getting donated doses, then giving them away. And finally, reports of doctors in the U.S. and Germany finding waste products in vaccine batches.
Okay, so a whole cluster of claims challenging vaccine safety, efficacy, and the transparency around them. The waste products claim sounds like it relates to manufacturing quality control.
Seems so. Now, let's shift to alleged political influence and incentives.
How does that factor in, according to the source?
The claim is the RKI wasn't truly scientifically independent, that politics interfered.
Prioritizing what exactly?
The source suggests separating vaccinated and unvaccinated people took priority over pure science. Then it goes after influencers who promoted vaccines,
In what way?
demanding they show their government contracts, questioning if they even got vaccinated themselves. There's a sarcastic comparison to promoting video games without playing them.
So questioning their motives and authenticity.
Yeah, criticizing those who changed their tune with the trends, and noting how aggressively people hesitant about vaccines were treated.
The role of influencers and media and potential political pressures on scientific bodies, these are definitely areas people scrutinize in public health crises.
The source then alleges that people making videos against vaccination were targeted by those who later got government deals to promote the Corona Warning app.
Oh, really? Targeted how?
It doesn't specify exactly how, but implies some kind of negative campaign. The narrator even claims they were personally offered money to promote the app.
Okay, so direct allegations of financial incentives and potentially biased promotion.
Right. And criticism of trash influencers for ignoring serious side effects, focusing on the pressure people felt. The narrator adds more personal anecdotes too. Their mother getting ill months after a vaccine, an uncle having a heart attack soon after, raising questions,
Connecting personal experiences to the broader claims about side effects and pressure.
Finally, the material broadens out to talk about what it sees as an erosion of critical thinking.
How so?
It references the Enlightenment, independent thought, and contrasts that with labeling dissenters as conspiracy theorists during the pandemic to shut them down.
A common observation, that label being used.
And it mentions AI potentially discouraging independent thought even further. Then poses this big question: are we in a democracy or an opinion dictatorship?
Strong words. How does it support that idea?
By getting examples of labels used to silence debate on other topics, too, like calling critics of Israel anti-Semitic or climate skeptics, climate deniers, that sort of thing.
So, arguing this is a broader pattern of stifling dissent.
Yes. And the final observation is that society keeps getting divided. Religion, football, vaccinated, unvaccinated, by focusing on differences, not common ground.
That's a pretty reflective, almost philosophical ending, linking the pandemic specifics to wider societal trends about discourse and division.
So just to wrap up the main arguments presented in this source material,
Yeah.
we've heard allegations about death stats being manipulated, questions about the real effectiveness and potential harm of masks and lockdowns.
Claims about a lack of transparency with the RKI protocols, serious allegations about vaccine side effects, and potential political interference in science and public messaging.
Right. As we finish this deep dive, we need to stress again. We've just explored the arguments and details as presented in this specific source material. We've highlighted the claims and concerns raised within that context.
Our goal was to give you a clear understanding of what's being argued in this particular account.
We hope this walkthrough has been helpful for that, and we'll leave you with this thought, prompted by the material itself. Considering that question raised, democracy or perhaps an opinion dictatorship, what role does really engaging critically with all sorts of information play in making sure we, as citizens, are truly informed and empowered?
Something to definitely think about as you navigate all the information out there.